Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Tanner's Favorite Things. I'm Tanner Knight, and today we're going to talk about an instrument that I haven't focused on hardly at all on this channel, but it's a very important one that I do a lot of my composing and just song work on, and that's this Roland Juno DS88 digital audio workstation. Maybe they just call it a digital workstation not to confuse you with the DAW, which is the computer program which captures sound that you work on. But we'll get to that in a second. We'll talk about how this interacts with a DAW and how you would capture sound in a couple different ways. So the Roland DS88 is a studio style of instrument. This is not the type of instrument that you just go take out and perform on the street with, because number one, it's heavy. It's heavy. It's a full 88 keys. This is the DS88, so that means it's the 88 key version. They do make a smaller version, or a couple different smaller versions, I believe, and those would obviously be a little bit lighter and easier to carry around, but this is the full Big Daddy 88 key weighted key setup. I'm not going to go as far to say that people don't play these live, because they are great instruments and worth porting around. Just because they're heavy doesn't mean they're insurmountable, but for the most part you'll see these in studios. You'll see them kind of just in one spot, and they occupy an important spot in a lot of different studios because they're so versatile. So why is this instrument so useful to me? Well, a lot of the music I make, I don't shy away from synthesizers. I really love the sound of a lot of synthesizers from the 80s, from the 70s, and some of the more modern ones as well. And the Roland DS line of synthesizers has their own bank of sounds that is just classic, and it's one that you've heard on countless records, and it's just very iconic in its own right because of the sound bank that comes with it. I use quite a bit of the sounds on here for all kinds of various songs, and just for inspiration, I'll just find a random one and try to make it work in some sort of context of a song. And you know, not all of them are knockouts, but there's so many on here. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sounds that you can choose from. Just to give you an idea of the bigger categories of sounds, we have drums and percussion, number 0 for some reason. And the next one is piano, and piano encompasses everything that's not a synthesizer with keys. That's a piano, harpsichord, celeste, a lot of different styles of pianos and electric pianos. So that's a whole category of just piano sounds. And of course, that's what you would expect to find on a keyboard instrument. But beyond that, we have another category of keyboard/organs. And maybe that's where a lot of the electric piano stuff is actually. I can't remember exactly, but between the piano and the keyboard and organ, you get every keyed instrument, a very good digital representation of it right here at your fingertips. And to wind through the sounds, all you do is use this dial here, and you can wind infinitely. It's awesome. But we also have a guitar and bass section, an orchestra section, just orchestral instruments, a world section, which I use quite a bit because I find the world instruments on here provide some interesting textures that aren't necessarily synthesizer-y, but aren't in your typical, Western sounds like the orchestra, guitar, bass, blah, blah, blah. Next to world, we have brass as number 6. Our vocal pad is number 7. A lot of vocally sounds and actual sounds that mimic the human voice very, very accurately. And then our last 2 are synth, which is pretty much the biggest category for me because I love just going through each and every one of them and trying to make music with it, and there's a ton under that synth category. The final one is called sample, and this is your own little button here that you can provide whatever samples you want to the Roland, and there's a way to record those samples and get them in here, and then you can access those samples as sounds for the keyboard at any point. I'll be honest, I haven't messed with the sample functionality at all. 0% experience with that, just due to the fact that there's so much between categories 0 and 8 that I just haven't run out of sounds. So that's a good thing, and hopefully you see it as such. But that's really the core of what this thing does. It provides you a sound bank of all kinds of just out-of-the-box sounds that you can hit a key and there it is. And then from there, it's your inspiration that needs to take over. Also in this middle section, we do have some controls here that are pretty important. There's a menu and a write button, which are involved in a lot of different activities. The write, mostly if you're going to write a new pattern in the pattern sequencer, which is something that I use quite a bit. But then we have the up, down, left, and right, plus and minus controls here, which are just individual parameter controls that you can set if you're trying to adjust individual parameters. And then we have a shift, exit, and enter button to make those things happen on those commands. On the left side of this middle panel, we do have a numeric button, which is instrumental in getting sounds off of a sound bank here. We'll talk more about additional sounds on a USB in a moment, but that button there does that. And then we have a favorite and a bank button that you can kind of tailor your own favorite sounds. You can just put them here and have them a little more accessible. So that's the middle panel. That's where most of the magic happens. There's a left panel and a right panel as well. The left panel is our master volume and mic in, phrase pad, lower and upper sliders. So that's a 4 slider pack that you can influence the sound on individual tracks or bank sounds just by sliding those sliders. And then we also have some dials that affect 3 different categories of sound: cutoff, resonance, attack, and release, or mic reverb, MFX control, chorus, delay, and reverb on its own dial, or assign 1, assign 2, assign 3, assign 4 that you can assign yourselves. So you can select which set of those 3 or 4 actually categories that you want to assign to these dials, and then these dials are able to affect the sound in that way. There's a regular keyboard control for split. This allows you to split the keyboard into 2 separate sounds, or dual, have 2 separate sounds stacked on one another, or a super layer where you can layer whatever you want. It's a bit more complex than what I usually get into, but it's a pretty cool feature. And then we have arpeggio. If you want to just hit one note and have it arpeggio, ba 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 bum, then that's how you do that, and you can dial those settings in, I believe, as well. The middle setting is key touch, which is where I typically live. The arpeggio is just set to repeat right now. So that's what that sounds like. Or patch perform. That's how you access these upper buttons here: split, dual, and super layer. So I leave that off and just keep it in the key touch, and that typically suits me well. And finally, we do have an octave and transposition section. If you want to transpose the whole keyboard up or down, you can do that. I think up to an octave in either direction. Speaking of transposing, there's a little dial right here that allows you to kind of it's like a whammy bar. It's kind of how I think about this. It has left, right, and up, and it's another way to affect the sound. And finally, on the right, we do have the phrase pad. This is where loops happen. If you're someone who creates loops, who plays over loops, who utilizes loops in their compositions, then boom, this is where you want to be. The pattern sequencer is really, really impressive. There's a whole set of prefabbed patterns in here that comes stock with the thing that I ignore entirely. I don't necessarily need pre-built loops. I like to create my own. And to do that, there's a whole other half of this called user that allows you to create your own user patterns, up to 8 tracks or 8 individual sounds that you can work in any kind of way, whether using it for counterpoint or just thickening a texture. That's how you go ahead and do that, and you have 8 of those tracks with their own controls. Tap to set a tempo if you want to do that. There's a mute, there's an erase button, and there's a loop button if you want it to continue looping or just loop through once and stop. The buttons on the other side here: rhythm pattern, pattern sequencer, and audio. The rhythm pattern is just a set of drum beats that are pre-prescribed, and they come in here and you can go ahead and pull one and use it if you want. And I don't think it's copywritten. It's just a loop that they have in here, and it's already configured just for rhythm. The next one is pattern sequencer, which utilizes more than just rhythm, all of the synthesizer-based sounds as well. So that's usually where I live because I like to utilize the drums and percussion on one track and then populate all the rest of these 8 with other tracks, other sounds, that is. There is an audio button. I'm not sure what that does, but it's in blue. Then there's the pattern length, tempo, and mixer buttons in the middle. The pattern length allows you to set the length of the pattern based on a number of measures. 1 measure, 4 measures, 8 measures. I think that's the limit. I don't think you can go past 8 measures, but you set that pattern length right there and use the arrows and dials and stuff to dial that in. Next, you have tempo, which the tempo obviously sets a specific tempo based on a BPM, and you can set that in here and wind it and find the correct tempo and rock and roll. And then mixer is just a quick volume check for each individual track. Sometimes like maybe a sitar sound would be quiet and a synthesizer sound would be really loud, and if you want to have those things in the same track, then you need to bump one down and the other up. In this case, the sitar might get bumped up and the synth gets marked down, and that way you can have a basic mix of your sounds before you record them into your DAW. And the last set of buttons here are back. You can go to the beginning, play or stop the loop, and then record over the loop. And it's not going to erase what you've already recorded, it'll add to it. So if you want to just plunk out one note at a time and then record a second part for your harmony, you can do that. And it's something that I sometimes take advantage of, but it's all very powerful and just a really, really great workstation. This compartment here does house, let's see here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 AA batteries. So it's not those big D cells or C cells even, it's just regular AA batteries, but it takes a ton of them, 8 of them. So if you want to go ahead and play this in the park, go ahead. You've got some portability. I've never put batteries in here to see if there's any latency or drop in quality of the sounds. I'm sure that it works fine, but it probably eats through batteries pretty quickly, I'd have to imagine. All right, I know we've done a lot of talking, but I'd like to flip this thing around and show you the back real quick so you can see the kind of connectivity that I utilize in my case for going into the DAW with this audio workstation. So let's talk about all of the connectivity that makes this such a versatile digital audio workstation. First off, we have a couple pedal 1/4 inch inputs, and we have one for control and one for hold. The hold is obviously the one that most people associate with a keyboarded instrument, but you do have a control if you want to add a second pedal that does something else, adds reverb, adds this, adds that, takes something away, then you can program that and add it there. I'll be honest, this actually caused me a lot of headache in the beginning because I don't have the best eyesight. I'll just come out and say it up close. I can't see that far in front of my face, so seeing these letters here sometimes is a little bit difficult in the throw of battle, and I put the hold one in the control and it just did the opposite of what I expected actually. So I had to come back here and read these and actually make sense of why that was happening. So if your pedal does what you don't expect it to, check where it's plugged in on the back. Next we have MIDI out and MIDI in. I'm not sure what kind of MIDI input would be necessary for a keyboard. I use the MIDI out all the time. That makes the most sense to me. This is basically a MIDI keyboard, MIDI capable keyboard. That's one of the functions of it that makes it so versatile, that you can have out from this port right into the back of my Focusrite Claret Octo preamp, and that accepts the MIDI, and I'm able to work with it in my Sony Acid digital audio workstation. Another really cool input on this keyboard that I've messed around with just for fun, but I haven't really had a lot of real world use for it, is this mic input. This is a 1/4 inch microphone input. It takes a standard 1/4 inch mic cable with obviously a XLR or some other microphone on the other end of it, but it has its own level dial, so you can dial in the volume of the microphone, and it actually preamps the sound coming from your microphone and puts it into the mix of the keyboard, and therefore you can capture it in any recording software. Again, that would be a lot more beneficial to, say, a live performer who just has this keyboard and they're sending it to a PA and they can capture their voice and the keyboard at the same time or something like that. But otherwise, you can use it for vocal effects too. You can add vocal effects this way and add to the tonal options that you have with this beast. Okay, this next one, I'm honestly not sure what it does. I probably should have looked this one up, but I thought that I knew all of these. But either way, it says EXT input. I'm assuming this is a 1/4 inch external input from some sort of music device, like an iPod or a phone or something like that, or even a full-on stereo you could hook up and have the 1/4 inch out providing the sound into this thing, and then you can utilize those sounds as well. I'm pretty sure that's what it is, but again, not 100% on the EXT or external, I'm assuming, input that then goes through to the outputs of this keyboard, which are here, right and left. If you're gonna have just one channel, stick it in this left mono. If you're gonna have a stereo out, then you'll obviously plug both of those in and capture both of them separately. And the reason why you would want a stereo out from this type of keyboard is mostly due to effects. If you had like a flange effect, for instance, that goes back and forth between two channels, then this would be a way to capture that in basically two channels or one stereo channel in your DAW. So there you go. 2 1/4 inch outs that go to your preamp. The last thing that you'll see is the 1/4 inch output for the headphones. This is just a standard 1/4 inch for most studio grade headphones. You can plug it right in and hear what's going on the keyboard without having to go through an amplifier or a preamp like the one I have here, the Octo Pre. So speaking of that, there are no speakers on this bad boy. Some people kind of associate the keyboard, the synthesizer, with having its own onboard speakers, and you know that's the case for a lot of lower end items, but this is not that. This is a very high-end piece of recording equipment, and as such it doesn't have little rinky-dink speakers at either side. So if you want to hear this, you have to utilize these outputs here either to an amplifier or to some other preamp that can capture the sound and then play it in your preferred way. And finally, we have a couple more things to talk about. This is a computer cable here. If you want this Roland to be your actual preamp for the sound, you can actually have one of these USB, this is an old style USB cable that plugs into your preamp, and then you can go into your digital audio workstation and select this as the output device. So that's, I don't know, I've never used that function because I have a preamp already, and this feeds into that via these outputs here. But you do have the option to do that. This little USB memory slot is an option if you want to expand the sound banks. And I tried this. I actually downloaded every single sound that Roland offers for free outside of what's offered on here already. And I put it in here and went through the steps to access it, and it's fine. The one problem that I find with this is that if you choose to access this USB, then that's the only set of sounds that you get, and it bypasses the internal memory, unless I'm just doing it wrong and someone else can point me in the right direction. But I did find that when you load up memory from a USB, then it takes all of the other sounds out of the equation and gives you only that. And you can't write them to the computer. You have to have them in here real time, turn the thing on, navigate to the bank, and then switch to it. It's kind of a pain in the butt. I don't really recommend it. I kind of thought that you'd be able to just pull them off the USB into the memory of the device, but again, I wasn't able to do that. So if anyone else has managed to do that, let me know. I'd love to do a video on that as well. And finally, we just have a little cable retention claw here and a DC in, which is the provided power cable with a power button that is nice and tactile as the very last thing that we see. So as I mentioned, a very versatile digital device and all the connectivity that you'd ever want in something like this. Most of the time when I'm utilizing this keyboard, it's for recording purposes, and there's a 1/4 inch out that goes into the preamp, and that's how the sound gets captured. But if I do want to just mess around and play this without having to fire up the monitors, which you can just fire up a track and enable the monitors and play through the monitors if you have studio monitors. But I do have an amplifier that's plugged into the second channel of this output so that I can hear it if I do want to just plunk around and actually get sound out of it. That's the sound out of this little Vox 10-inch AC10 C1 amplifier. This is a guitar amp, but there's absolutely no reason why you can't use it with this style of instrument. So that's what I've got, and it provides me sound, and it gets real loud if you want it to. But for the most part, I keep it pretty quiet because I'm just usually working through ideas. You know, I don't have to fire up a whole workstation session and get things clicked and picked in order to get sound out of the monitors. So that's a nice little option that I do take advantage of out of the second channel here. So hopefully you want to hear what this thing sounds like. I know I do. So let's play it. Right now, I just fired it up. I just turned on the amplifier, but we're actually going to go to the preamp and capture what's coming out of this in my DAW with my Focusrite Claret 8 preamp. So this is just occupying one channel and it's a mono out. So from now on, you'll be hearing what goes into the DAW and not what comes out of this amplifier. So here's piano sound number 1. It's PFS01 is the code for this one, and it sounds like this. So that's a really nice sounding piano, very authentic sounding to me, and it's one of about 1,000 piano sounds on here. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but a ton of different piano sounds. So let's just go ahead and assume that all the piano sounds sound like a piano and go to one of my favorites, the drums and percussion. I think that this is one of the best uses of this as a tool for me personally, because when I'm working up a track, if it's a song that I don't really have an idea of what's going on, I will pull up a drum beat and utilize the beat to give me the inspiration to figure out the rest of the parts. And if I don't want to get on the drum kit, I'll just go ahead and pull up a sound. Maybe that's a little loud, bump that one back. And I'll record that and kind of lay on top of that and maybe add some hi-hat. I never use this one, by the way. This is Studio Kit number 1. I never use this one. I'm typically in the 808. I love the 808. Or one of the dance kits because they have a lot of just more electronic sounding drums, and I think that this keyboard lends itself to that. Roland invented the TS808, by the way, so the 808 sounds on here are the real deal ones. We're not doing any phony baloney, hope it sounds like an 808. This is an actual Roland 808 sound bank, and it sounds really great. So you can really have a lot of fun with this if you just get a sense of what can be done. And you know, there's a sound for every single key here. Maybe not every single one. I don't think the N ones have it in this particular bank. But we start with the G. And then we run out up there. So that's all of the TS808 sounds right at your fingertip. So great. And there's just a lot of different kits in here that you can choose from. If there's a particular kick sound you're looking for, it's in there. The keyboard and organ are very initial, just number 1 sound is called Fantasy JV. That's an 80s synth if I ever heard one. A few of my favorite ones here. Let's just go ahead and find Juno harpsichord. This is kind of a cool one. Yeah, you get the idea. It sounds like a harpsichord, but there's all kinds of different sounds. This one, Himalaya Ice, is one that I actually really like. If you listen to my music, you'll actually probably recognize this one from a lot of, especially my crystal albums. This one just lends itself to the crystal medium in my mind so well. It's vibey, it's chimey, and there's just a million different sounds on here. And I'm not going to bore you with all of them, obviously, but let's take a look at a story harp. This is one I use quite a bit. It has a lot of ambiance. The harp is one of my favorite instruments just overall. And I think that it lends itself to a digital representation very well because it has a nice, easy attack that's not too sharp, it's rounded, but then it has a quick decay. Really makes you want to go kind of crazy with some of the 80s synth sounds on here. They're just a little cool and a little not cool at the same time. I guess that makes me like them even more for some reason. So let's go to the synth section and find one of my personal favorites, 016 Juno Lead, and it sounds like this. Just so thick, and it makes me just want to just add more thickness to it. It's just exactly what I want a synthesizer to sound like, and there's a number of different sounds on here that achieve that specific goal. And just choose one at random. I don't know this one. Cell Skew Lead 068. So one thing to note about especially the synth bank is that a lot of these are not polyphonic, they are monophonic, which means one note at a time, folks. So if you want two notes, you sacrifice the other note in order to get the new note. One limitation that you should be aware of, and it's not necessarily a limitation of the sound, it's just how it's created. So this is what you'll hear in a lot of Emerson, Lake and Palmer, a lot of these monophonic style deals. You'll hear a lot of it in actually more modern hip hop. They'll use some of these monophonic sounds just to provide a different sound that you probably may not have heard. not all of them are 100% usable, but you know, it's a fun game. Just spin it and see what you get. Or whatever. So I know that we're getting kind of long in the tooth in this video, but I did want to just throw together one pattern sequence. So I'm going to go into the pattern sequencer, hit over to change that to user, and then under the user I have a lot of different ones recorded already. So I'm going to have to go into the 80s to find an unused track right here. So now what we have is the ability to lay down a drum track first. Let's just do that real quick with a pattern length of 4. Enter and hit yes, and that will allow you to have 4 measures. And I do also like to switch the count in to wait note. That way it'll just have a cued recording for you until you touch it. So I want to be in the drums percussion. So there's a 5-track loop. I can obviously add the other 3, but you get the idea. It's a layering process. I'm using counterpoint here to kind of figure out what the next melody of the next sound will be. And I use this technique quite a bit for my own just fleshing out of my ears, trying to get new sounds, different sounds, and new interactions between sounds. And this is a really great tool for me to do that. So if you were going to use this in an actual mix, it would be advised to record each individual track to its own track in the DAW, and then you can mix them separately. That's what I do. And it kind of adds another layer of being able to work with the tracks after they're recorded without bumping up against a ceiling or something like that. So I know this has been a long video, and if you've made it this far, I really appreciate it, but this is something that I'm really excited about and that I use almost every day in the studio. So if I'm going to come in here and make music, it often starts here. And that's why this is such an important piece of kit for me. And if you have one, I'd love to hear what you think. I know that there's the other DS family, the DS66 or 61, whatever that range is, and some other DS Roland products. So let me know if you have that and you use it in a similar way or a completely different way. I honestly would love to use this in more ways if I can, but you know, time is what it is, so I can only absorb so much, and if you have a specific suggestion for me, then I'll take a look. So thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you like this type of content. That always helps with my YouTube metrics. And of course, let me know what you think in the comments, and I will see you on the next one.